Hello everybody, and welcome to another wonderful Tuesday. And of course my name is Taylor McCurdy, and I'll be hosting all of you on this journey of these wonderful live cameras. And of course this wouldn't be made possible if it wasn't all powered by explore.org, so a big thank you there. And it seems as though we've got lots of people joining us today, which is quite exciting. So we've got Zygote who says, hello Taylor, Aussie Jan, g'day, not hello mates, g'day mate. I'm going to say it like that. You've got your coffee as usual. Amber, happy Tuesday to all of you. Looking forward to another interesting show. No pressure from you then, Amber. And then Durrell, good morning, another fun, interesting Tuesday. I'm quite excited as well because on our screens right now, we're staring at an ostrich and a couple of wildebeest bottoms, my favorite topics, and we are none other than at the towel cam, so that's what you're basically watching right now. And yeah, quite an interesting scene. I haven't seen ostriches in such a long time, but I was in the Kruger National Park a couple of days ago and I saw some ostriches, and it's really funny because we were not too far away from one of the eastern boundaries of the northern Sabi Sand, and it's like they were just sort of standing glaring at the invisible boundary saying, well, we won't cross that border, because I always used to search for ostriches on the northern Sabi Sand, but never used to see them. But anyways, this looks like it's a male ostrich, and that is just, laying down. He's hot. It's been quite a warm day, and you can tell that it is hot is when we were zoomed in a bit closer and the ostrich is actually sort of looking in our direction. Maybe we can have a closer look at it again. You'll notice that its beak is slightly ajar. And if you remember last Tuesday, we actually had something quite similar. We were watching a heron performing the same behavior. We call that the gular flutter, where they'll cool themselves down by evaporation. But now the ostrich is doing something different. Pecking the ground, gobbling up small stones. At first I thought it was going to have a dust bath, which it might still do. It looks like the substrate is quite powdery over there. But it's also very important with the very simple digestive systems that ostriches have, is that they do need to ingest stones into their crop to actually, to help grind up their food. Well, the gizzard does a lot of that. Kauru, you said hello, Taylor. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining, of course. It's always just so nice to get to know some of you personally. So I'm looking forward to all of your questions. And if this is your first time watching and you haven't decided to type hello, you can, because this is a live and interactive show. So comment away as you will, whichever's easiest for you. So, not unusual for animals to be sitting down during the heat of the day. I mean, the wildebeest are doing it right at the back. Wildebeest are funny animals. They hardly ever sit under the shade. They're always just out in the open, quite happy, acclimatized to the heat, as is this ostrich. And Trainer Matt, you've just popped on and you said good morning from North Carolina, USA. Well, it is sunny South Africa this afternoon, and I hope that the weather is going to be treating you well, Matt. And I'm hoping that we're going to see some action. Maybe how about some ostrich wildebeest interspecies action for you this afternoon? That would be quite nice. If you are quite concerned, though, about this ostrich as to why it's on its own, this is not an unusual scene to see. Ostriches are quite interesting with their sort of social structures. Sometimes they'll be together, but for the most part, they are on their own, unless they have paired up. You'll find a male and female moving around together, normally when they have chicks. Otherwise, it's kind of a free-for-all, which always makes me giggle with the ostriches. You never quite know what's going on. One minute he's with her, then he's dancing for someone else. It's all quite exciting. But big birds, in fact, very large birds, these ostriches, and they're quite deceiving when we look at them from vehicles and we stare at them on these live cameras. They don't look particularly impressive, but they're much taller than I are when they do stand up. And it seems as though there's a couple of other things on the cameras, so let's go and check out some fish eagles. There we go. So, if I'm not mistaken, we are now in Baluli, and I'm not sure what's going on with the camera. I don't know if it's particularly windy. But anyways, two fish eagles sitting up in a tree. So just very quickly going back to just talking about the ostrich. We'll talk about the fish eagles in a minute. From Rolling Trouble. You were asking if that was a mineral spot. It definitely looked like it. There were quite a few rocks. Actually, am I being a pain if we go back to the towel cam to have a look at the ostrich? Because this is quite an interesting question. And I've been trying to figure it out because Rolling Trouble, I've never actually been to Madikwe before. I've worked up in areas not too far away from Madikwe, but it would be quite nice to, of course, I want to get out and I want to touch those rocks because those white rocks that are surrounding look very powder-like. They remind me a lot of limestone. So I would most certainly say that area around the Waterhole at the towel cam that the ostrich was sort of sitting in could be some, definitely like a concentration of nutrients, if you will. So you maybe see zebras licking the ground. They love to do that. The geophagy. Elephants, putting trunkfuls of whatever they can find, especially soil. Could have rhinos, of course, licking the ground. Anything, when they need more of it. So I'd be quite confident in saying that just by looking at it. But if I wanted to be 100%, I really would need to get out and just have a look at what rock types are truly around and in that area. It's difficult to gauge from a camera. Caroline, you've just joined. Good morning from Texas. Howdy. I mean, I say that like everybody's a cowboy in Texas. If I lived in Texas, I would have a cowboy hat and wear cowboy boots and I'd ride my horse everywhere. I'm just saying. Or a mule. I wouldn't mind having a mule. That would be quite an exciting way to do that. Actually, in the town that I live, it's not uncommon to see people on horses just doing their thing, going through the drive-thrus, getting an ice cream, something along those lines. It's quite comical, in fact. But anyways, these two fish eagles are just sitting up in the tree, just, I suppose, passing by time as they preen their feathers as birds normally do, waiting for something to catch their attention. And I had the funniest sighting just the other day, as well when I was in the Kruger National Park. It was really wonderful, where we always talk about fish eagles, and as the name suggests, they're prolific fish hunters, and that they are. They absolutely are prolific hunters. And one thing that I've seen fish eagles do quite often is chase other birds. I've also seen them scavenging on carcasses, not just fish carcasses, but mammal carcasses. But I have seen them go after birds. Egyptian goose goslings, one of their favorites. I had an insane sighting in South Luangwa where a fish eagle was chasing a spoonbill. That was unbelievable. And my new favorite sighting was a pair of Egyptian geese that were just sort of flying across the water's edge of this one massive dam. And then this fish eagle dropped down and chased it and almost grabbed it. So, yeah, so that was quite a fun sight to see. But maybe the fish eagles will get up to something interesting. Okay, so we're back at Tau. And now we're just having a look. There's the Egyptian geese that I was telling you about. Not the ones that were being chased, though. They're a little bit further away, and we know that Egyptian geese are fairly territorial. They'll hold their ground. They're doing a bit of grazing. But it's now interesting to have a look at the minerals. Like, what is going on here? Is it all this white up? I'm wondering, are those also maybe like termite mounds? It could be termite mounds because of the soil. You know, termite mounds can be any color they wanted to if you put orange dye in the ground. So I think that's exactly what those are. I'm sorry if I sound like I'm completely ridiculous, but I've never been here before. But there seems to be a lot of clay, I think a lot of calcium in these soils, which normally you'll find animals sort of feeding on. We've got a kudu bull that has just come down to have a drink, and a waterbuck in the foreground, and he is enormous. He is absolutely stunning. Looks like there's all sorts of sort of birds moving around at the moment. Just seeing the top of their head, maybe some coots, some black-winged stilts, and everything. And now the waterbuck's going in for a bit of a swim. Are you going to go feed on the aquatic vegetation? I'd probably only eat that. Although I'm not so sure of its nutritious value, but it would be a lot more pleasant eating something that's maybe not as good for you while having a swim. And also because this dam is so wide and so open, look how relaxed the animals are. I say this and the kudu jumps away, of course he does. But, you know, typically around water holes, you normally see a degree of discomfort. So female waterbuck, she's relaxed and eating, and the kudu bull wasn't so happy, and he just had a quick scan around. And there's a couple of sort of low vegetation about that would definitely be obscuring the view. And, you know, lions or a leopard or a cheetah or anything along those lines could definitely be waiting there. Bob from Kalamazoo, I was wondering when you were going to pop on and say hello. Thank you for the happy Tuesday wishes. It's been a really busy day, like a crazy day. In fact, I can't even believe that it's already after 4 p.m. in the afternoon. It's quite ridiculous. I've still got so much to do, including an astronomy practical that I have to do this evening. I know nothing about stars, but we're gonna do it anyways. No, I'm joking. I know a little bit about stars, not enough though. I'm just trying to see what is she eating? What is this vegetation? Whenever I see aquatic vegetation, I'm terrible. I'm like, it's water hyacinth. I just immediately jump to those conclusions because it's one of the most, in fact, it might be the most invasive aquatic vegetation in South Africa. It has found its ways into all of our waterways, whether they're freshwater, so into dams, into rivers, and it just spreads like wildfire. But animals seem to enjoy it and seem to, you know, feast on it lots. Or it could be lilies. That's the other thing. It's just the leaf structure doesn't look, you know, big enough that it's potentially any of the water lilies. But of course, they stand to be corrected. As you can see how those leaves are quite large, but not the size necessarily of a lily, and they're pulling up the roots and the stems, which almost have like air pockets in them. They're quite squishy, which must be quite interesting to chew. Not that I've ever eaten one. Tim, great question from you. You've asked, which antelope is best in terms of survival? Sure, this is a tricky one because there's so many different variations here. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to have a conversation about this. And straight off the bat, I'm going to say that an impala, or the species of impala, Apicerus malampus, hands down, is the most successful antelope species in Africa. I think I'm allowed to say the world. They are so widely distributed, and because they can feed on so many different types of food, this allows them to adapt to all sorts of vegetation. You know, they're also streamlined, they can run pretty fast. They're quite a hardy antelope. They don't seem to be too susceptible to certain parasites and diseases. They're quite a rugged antelope. So I would go with overall an impala. However, if you had to be like location specific, now let's say now we're in the desert, I don't know how well an impala is going to do in the desert. You know, then you start to look at antelope that don't need to have lots of water, so they're not water dependent. Impala are water dependent, so they need to drink once a day. You get other animals like a gemsbok, for an example, or an oryx is maybe another name that you've heard of, which we probably won't see on these cameras. They're pretty successful. They don't need to drink water every single day. They've got amazing techniques to cool themselves down, but without wasting too much energy. They eat melons, they eat all sorts of other things in order to get their moisture. So they're quite successful. Too, out of the bigger antelope species. And then I think, we start to look at small ones like common dacre and that type of thing. They just hide amongst the scrub, and we forget about them, and they're really tough and hardy too. But I'm still going to stick overall, I think, impala. Otherwise, a gemsbok has to be up there. Eland, pretty good too, but I think gemsbok are tougher. Oh, Zygote, you've said impala would be your guess. Tim, what do you think? What are your suggestions? I mean, it's quite interesting. If you throw out some antelope species, we can definitely talk about them. Wildebeest, obviously, are very widely distributed throughout Africa. However, their downfall is that they're grazers. So we see lots of different species of wildebeest. Actually, quite a few of the species of wildebeest that we see are subspecies of the blue wildebeest, which is what we're looking at the moment. And for those of you that are unsure as to what a subspecies is, essentially it's basically the same animal, but normally it's been separated by some sort of geographical feature, or a population of them have become isolated. And whether they've become isolated now because of a big mountain range or a lake or whatever the case is, you start to notice some difference, and those differences are normally in colors and maybe the patterns on the animal, and to a degree it could be size, but for the most part they're very, very closely related. So wildebeest, like I said, are grazers. They like short cropped grasses too. They aren't even a fan. If there's tall grass and they don't have to eat it, they're going to follow the zebra or any other grazing animals, like white rhinos, for an example, even elephants that will crop the grasses much shorter and follow them. We actually call this grazing facilitation, and that's why wildebeest and zebra have such a close relationship with one another, and why you typically see them together. And for those of you that don't know this, it's not the wildebeest that lead the great migration that starts in the southern plains of the Serengeti in Tanzania and end up in the north of Mara, and then they all head south again. It's just a constant rotation. It's the zebra that are actually leading them. And without the zebra, the wildebeest would really struggle, because the tall grasses in East Africa, you lose a wildebeest in them. But zebras and elephants and buffalo don't particularly mind the length of grass they feed on, so they help with that. So they wouldn't do too well everywhere. So Lisa, you've said, is it the same plant? I'm assuming we're talking about the aquatic plant now that was growing on the water that's growing at Tembe, the green plant. I really think it is. And again, I think there's a mixture of plants here. I definitely think that there are some water lilies that are occurring here. But one of the biggest issues in South Africa is this water hyacinth, and it's coming from South America. And I can't even begin to tell you how truly terrible it is. And what it does is it forms a mat on the surface of the water. Yes. Let's have a look at Tembe. And let's maybe see if we can find that plant, and then I can just have a look. So I'll wait for that to pop up. And now we're just going to look at these look like wild date palms from over here. We get two palm species in South Africa. We get the wild date palms, and then we also get the lala palms. So So there's all the lush green vegetation that you can see just at the bottom of your screen. And you can see how it's formed like a dense mat. You also get something called water lettuce. That's another plant species, and it does something quite similar. But this is very typical of water hyacinth. Again, I stand corrected. I'd love to be able to go and look at it and up close and see the details, and then I'll be able to accurately identify it. But we'll be quite broad for the most time. But this water here is not healthy. It looks lovely and lush and green, and this is something that you quite often see in Zambia. You quite often see it in Zimbabwe, where it gets quite harsh and dry as we come into the winter months in the southern hemisphere. But yes, there is light hitting the surface of those plants, and they are able to photosynthesize, but nothing else is able to reach, or no light is able to penetrate beneath that thick surface. And what happens is that the water just starts to deoxygenate, and fish and microorganisms and various aquatic invertebrates are unable to survive, which is very sad. So, it might be fine for frogs to hop around on top, but it's not going to be a very healthy ecosystem. And then, of course, as those little mud wallows that we were looking at just a moment ago, they're all starting to dry out. The same thing happens. There's not fresh water that's being added to it. The algae starts to build up. And obviously, algae is great. It just depends what type you have. Green algae, of course, can photosynthesize, and there's lots of different species that will feed on it. But again, too much algae in an area can be detrimental to a water system. Green algae is obviously not the same as cyanobacteria. They can produce quite harmful substances, and we typically see cyanobacteria causing big problems and poisoning water holes during the dry seasons. And then normally you'll actually see how the algal blooms form. They get pushed up by the winds, and they'll congregate in one area of the dam. And it's just, it's not wonderful at all. Oh, okay. I think what we're going to do is we're going to go over to Olifants River and see if there's anything happening there. But Lisa, you mentioned eland as a house success for eland. Elands are pretty good. Again, their diet is varied. And they are able to survive in fairly wet conditions as well as quite arid areas too. One thing I did notice in the Eastern Cape, at one point, I don't know if there was a specific virus or parasite going around, but this reserve I used to work on, the eland were dying, the calves were dying, and they were covered in ticks. So I don't know how resistant they are to heart water, which is like tick bite fever for animals, or sometimes people will call it biliary. We call it biliary when we talk about domestic animals like cats and dogs and sheep and that type of thing. So, yeah, eland, I suppose, but I think Gemsbok are like more in the extreme because they can just survive on absolutely nothing. Hippos are in the same boat as a wildebeest. If there's water around, fantastic. They actually can survive without water. They just need to find some places to cool themselves off. A water source of some kind is obviously the best option for that. However, I've seen in extreme dry areas, and when we had the horrific drought that lasted many, many years, from it was like 2014 till 2018, I was watching a lot of hippos were in drainage lines, sort of these depressions that cut through the land. And normally, they might flow for 1 or 2 days of the rainy season, but they've got sandy beds and densely vegetated with trees. So you would see them sort of lying there, and they'd be fine, not 100% happy, because when they start to take on that side of things, when there's no water around, that there's no grazing. So that's why I said they're in a similar boat as wildebeest. They are heavily grazers, and I had a cool sighting once at Chitwa Dam, where we had a tree that had fallen over into the water, and there were weaver nests, and the hippos were so hungry they were pulling the weaver nests from the tree and eating them, which was crazy. I've also seen hippos eating out of white rhino dung middens, just trying to get some kind of digestible material, which was really horrific. Going back to the conversation, I suppose, of survival, Tim, you said you agree. You also said Gemsbok or oryx. Do you think that they'd be quite good? I really do. I mean, I think I haven't even gone into animals up in North Africa, just because honestly my knowledge is quite limited on them. But yeah, I think that they're pretty good. I mean, we can also go into the hartebeest sort of family, or tsessebees or topies, those kinds of things. I think they're pretty hardy too. They're also just selective. They just feed on grass. So something like even a kudu would probably do quite well. It's just with kudu, we see that they are very susceptible to anthrax. And anthrax, again, is a natural forming bacteria that lives up in the soil for many, many, many years. And that, again, is, you know, prolific in dry seasons or droughts. And kudu are notorious for picking it up. So I still think impala is my best bet there. Mike from Ontario, Canada, hello. You've asked, how are the river levels this year? That you were in March in 2016 and everything was so desperately dry. Well, Mike, everything got even worse after 2016. It was dire. 2017 was not much better. Thankfully, there was better rain in 2018. We have been so fortunate in the northern parts of South Africa, so in the provinces of Limpopo and Mpumalanga. That's basically like where the Greater Kruger is and all these game reserves are, including olifants. And as you can see, the water levels are doing good. Look, the hippos are thriving. We've got Mom and a little one having a little bit of a play. But Mike, what we did have was like the most insane late rains. We had this huge tropical cyclone that they tracked for over a month. And it sort of came into Mozambique and went up a bit north and then came back down and came back in again. And that opened up the heavens. Goodness gracious. And we had so much rain. Oh my gosh, there was a hippo making a noise. And we had so much rain, in fact, that it was, some people were comparing it to some of the really bad floods that we had in 2012 in like the Greater Kruger area. So I am fairly confident in saying that we will have no water issues this year. The dams are the fullest I have ever seen them in my career, because obviously I started my career down in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. In 2012, we also had really bad or big, huge floods. But the, you know, seasons are slightly different. You know, they have quite a bit of rain during our typical dry season up in the northern parts of the country, and just in the Sabi Sand, the dams are the fullest they've ever been. I mean, so they're going to have good water. There's so much extra grazing. I think the grass has flowered like 3 times this year. I've seen marula trees fruiting twice. I haven't stopped sneezing, basically, and that's normally how I know. So look how lush everything is. Look how wide the Olifants River is. It's doing very well. And there's a bridge that's near a restaurant. If you just leave Hoedspruit on your way to Palabora, and you go over the Olifants River. And when we had those big floods, it was, when was it, February? Must have been end of February into March. Maybe it was March. My memory is terrible. The water was only a couple of meters underneath this high water bridge, and it's very much raised. And when I went there not too long ago, it's quite impressive to see that the water is still raging, which is fantastic. And just lots of hippo activity. You can see the river still moving quite nicely, though. But there's a lot of excitement going on down there. So obviously, Mom's trying to swim away from the little one. Not that they swim, but she's propelling off of the ground. And the youngster looks like it's in hot pursuit. Or is that Mom at the back and that maybe another hippo that's just sort of entertaining the young one? I've lost count because that little one was doing a switcherooski. But all 3 of them are now moving somewhere else. Where are you going? And the water can't be too deep there because it doesn't look like a tiny jelly bean hippo, but, you know, it's definitely still young. So Mom would be unlikely taking it to the deepest parts of the river. But this river will have one deep channel, and then for the most part, even now, we could probably wade across it. Not that I would recommend that because of all the crocodiles. And also, it's quite deceiving how fast a river is flowing. Yes, please don't get into crocodile-infested waters. Like, I would never cross this river, not a chance. I definitely not, like, no one could pay me any amount of money to cross the Zambezi River by swimming. Never. I would absolutely refuse. That's an absolute death sentence. Olifants River, I don't know. I think I'm terrified of crocodiles. I think everyone should be really scared of crocodiles. They've been on this planet for a very long time. Okay. Hippos. Is this all you're going to show us? I think this is all the hippos are going to show us. So let's go back to Tau, seeing as though that's normally the most active camera. And maybe we can have a look at some birds or some other wildlife. Ah, look at other wildlife it is. Waterbuck, yellow-billed stork, blacksmith lapwing. The usual suspects, all doing their thing. What I do like is how this yellow-billed stork is actually taking advantage of the waterbuck as they feed. Because as those waterbuck feed, there's going to be fish and all sorts of other things investigating around them. And because lots of oily secretions on their coats. And I mean, you've probably put your feet in the water before and had fish nibble on your toes. They'll probably be doing the same thing to those waterbuck. And of course, if they step and move around too quickly, they're also going to chase those fish away. So I think what the stork is hoping for is that some of those fish or frogs are going to be chased in the direction of it. It looks like it's actually looking for some kind of movement. Instead of, having its beak in the water, open wide, waiting to feel some movement in the sensory nerves that they have, and then clamp their beak shut, that actually looks like it may be looking for a bit of a reflection from the silvery scales. And for the most part, those fish, because they're laterally compressed, you don't really see them. But as soon as they turn onto their side and that light catches a shimmer of them, I mean, you know what it's like. You can see them quite easily. This is a very peaceful scene. I'd love to just sit here all day long and just watch this camera. Imagine the really epic photos you could get if you were laying on your belly somewhere, just like camouflaged. Because obviously you don't really want to be seen. And a couple of red-knobbed coots by the look of it, all swimming around. Always amazed to see them out in the open vegetation, because I'm normally used to seeing them hiding away in phragmites, which are the tall reeds, and being quite shy. Apparently not these ones. Anyways, I can't believe that 30 minutes is up. I've spoken the hind leg of a donkey as I normally do, and it's been wonderful. So thank you very much for all of your questions. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. And of course, we're going to be doing this all again on Thursday. So I hope you're ready for that. But enjoy your morning, your afternoon, your evening, wherever you may be in the world. And until next time, cheerio.